This mother buries her child, but 5 years later has a strange and revealing dream. These parents had to bury 2 of their children, and 5 years later, the mother has a strange and revealing dream that will change their lives. A story you won't want to miss. The year is 1983, and Dave and Jane Dalton's life was good. They had 5 healthy children and were expecting their 6th. But during the pregnancy, the couple received unexpected news. Their next child, Tommy, would be born with Down syndrome. The parents were shocked and didn't know what it would mean for everyone, but decided to make the best of the situation. When Tommy was born, it was a real shock, recalls Dave. He had Down syndrome, and that didn't faze anyone. We weren't sure what it meant, but we knew it was different than what we had planned. They didn't know what their life would look like in the future, but they knew that they had to be there for each other. When the couple learned that their future son had Down syndrome, they initially prayed that God would heal him. But what they didn't expect was that they would have to fight for his life. Although the birth itself went well, after taking him home, it became clear that all was not well with the child. Life was not always easy, but David and Jane loved Tommy as much as they loved their other children. It hurt them very much to see the newborn suffer so much. He had very low muscle tone, and about 6 weeks after birth, he went into full cardiac arrest, and they had to resuscitate him on the way to the hospital. Unfortunately, Tommy did not survive. Dave and Jane had to say goodbye to their son. It was at that moment that the family began to realize how precious their son's life was. They realized that by asking God to heal Tommy, they were in fact asking Tommy to stop being who he was. When you fight for your son's life, it brings you together. It's like you realize that this life is very precious, and we're happy with who he is, said Dave. Tommy's death was hard on the entire family, but the story doesn't end there. After losing their son, Dave and Jane decided to stop having any more children. We decided that our family was complete, explained Jane. We had 4 boys and 1 girl, and it was great. But more bad news was to come. Shortly after losing Tommy, the family suffered another great tragedy. In 1985, 4-year-old Brian underwent elective surgery and had an allergic reaction to the anesthetic. He ended up in a coma and died 3 days later. Once again, the family was devastated and took a long time to recover. Brian's death shocked the whole family, and Jane says that thinking about it now, more than 3 decades later, still brings tears to her eyes. Years passed, but something strange began to happen. 5 years later, Jane had a dream about a baby with Down syndrome. For several nights in a row, she had the exact same dream, and each time she felt that the child needed her help. After the 3rd night with the same dream, she knew that something was up. She started paying more attention to the dream and realized she had to do something. The next day, Jane and Dave called an adoption agency. At first, they were told the wait was long and that it would take at least 6 months before they could adopt a child, but it wasn't 10 minutes later and they got a call. A family had backed out of an adoption, and the agency wondered if Jane and Dave could intervene. Although it was very sudden, the couple was overjoyed and immediately said yes. We called the agency, and they told us that they were full at the time, but they had a class starting in about 6 months. And just 10 minutes later, they called us back to tell us they had a cancellation and asked if we could go that evening. The child in question was Ben, and it turned out to be their first adopted child. The boy was just a few weeks old, and like Tommy, was born with Down syndrome. Everyone in the family fell in love with him, and both Jane and Dave saw the boy as their own son. Even when they were told that Ben had heart problems, they were not discouraged. They adopted him despite the immense grief and sense of loss they had felt after the death of their 2 sons a few years earlier. At 7 months old, Ben had to undergo a complicated heart operation. The boy was paralyzed for weeks to see if he would survive. But suddenly, something amazing happened. Recalling that day, Dave said the following: "One day we were with him in the hospital, and we felt Ben's little spirit rise up and say, 'I'm gonna pull through.' Then, 10 minutes later, the doctor comes in and tells us that the lab results are still the same and not much has changed. And it did. At that time, the doctor said Ben had a 5% chance of living to be 10 years old, and today, he's over 30 and doing quite well. It surprised everyone and really defied the odds, but the story doesn't end there. Seeing Ben improve, Jane and Dave felt the urge to adopt again. They loved caring for children with Down syndrome so much that they knew it was the right thing to do. The agency contacted them and told them they had a little girl. Her name was Emily, and she came from Ethiopia. Jane and Dave went to see her, and it took them only a couple of seconds to fall in love with her. This was in 1995. But the family would continue to grow for much longer. The next child to join the family was Daniel. Unfortunately, the boy had multiple serious medical problems and passed away 9 months after he was brought home from the hospital. Once again, the Dalton family was faced with a painful loss. On the one hand, the fact that they had already lost 2 sons helped them understand what to expect. But on the other hand, it also brought all the old memories of Tommy and Brian to the surface again. The grieving began anew, but the Daltons were not about to let go of their adoption plans. Lainey was the 4th child they had adopted. The process had been somewhat unexpected. A few months after Daniel's death, they went on a family vacation. On the way back, they stopped to visit Emily's adoptive mother, and she told them some news. She said there was a little girl with Down syndrome. She looks like a doll, recalls Dave. If we had gone straight home, we would never have known about Lainey. Sometime later, they met a Ukrainian couple. By then, Ukraine was just starting to open up to international adoption, and the couple had already been helping people trying to adopt from there. They needed a lawyer, and Dave was an adoption lawyer, so it made sense. He flew to Ukraine. As she went through the scrapbooks and looked at the pictures of the children waiting to be adopted, she noticed something unusual. There was not a single child with Down syndrome. When she asked about it, the response was anything but pleasant. Who would want them? She asked. She learned that in Ukraine, children with Down syndrome are often abandoned by their parents and forced to live their entire lives in orphanages. Jane and Dave were so heartbroken that they decided to do something. They soon became the first couple in the United States to adopt a child with Down syndrome in Ukraine. Their first Ukrainian child was Anya, and she was most likely the first Ukrainian child with Down syndrome to be adopted. But Jane and Dave didn't stop there, and Anya was soon followed by 4 other children: Jack, Philip, Marina, and Molly. One day, they even took a trip to a Ukrainian mental institution. They couldn't believe what they were seeing, and knowing that their children would have gone there if they hadn't been adopted was painful to say the least. The conditions were horrible, and many children died within the first year. Seeing this changed Jane and Dave forever, and they knew they had found their calling in life. From a normal-sized family, the Daltons are now a huge family with 15 children, 12 of them with Down syndrome. For over 2 decades, they have changed the lives of the children they adopted, and what started as a middle-of-the-night dream has become a life mission. Both Jane and Dave are thrilled with their many children and wouldn't have it any other way. It's a great privilege. I think everyone should have a child with Down syndrome. We have received nothing but immense love from these children and would be much poorer without them, says Jane. Today, all of the couple's children are grown, and some of them have started their own families. About their large and loving family, Jane had this to say: "We never planned to have 15 children. 3 was a possibility. 5 would have been fine," Dave added. There are 200 million orphans in the world, and there are 4 billion Christians. There shouldn't be a single bed full of orphans. What an amazing family. Can you imagine doing something like this? And have you ever had a dream that changed your life forever? Share in the comments, and see you tomorrow in the next video.